Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Spartan Forge. On today's episode, I am joined by the CEO of the National Deer Association, Nick Pinizzotto. Nick lives in Pennsylvania and has an extensive background in policy and protecting our hunting heritage. We discuss NDA's mission, deer hunting educational resources, deer hunter numbers, biggest threats to deer hunting in 2022, why managing for age class is beneficial, and much more. As this podcast goes out, I'm still on my Montana elk hunt. It should be a couple weeks into the hunt at this point, but recording all this stuff ahead of time, as I have for the last few episodes. It is currently 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 days here before I leave, and just trying to get everything done and get everything wrapped up so when I leave, I don't have to think about things. I can just focus on hunting. But with that being said, I really hope that you enjoy this podcast with Nick. I think talking about some of these things that are less sexy when it comes to deer hunting and protecting deer is incredibly important. And I wanted to be able to share this podcast with Nick and some really interesting stuff in here as well as far as their deer report, which I really highly recommend everyone dives into NDA's deer report. It's free to be able to download off their website. And definitely, check that out. So, and as we start rolling in here, we're going to start into getting some really whitetail heavy content. There's going to be a lot more of that where this comes from, I guess, coming forward with Greg Litzinger coming up on next week and then just kind of rolling through it for the rest of the fall. So I hope everyone enjoys it and has a great rest of your week. All right, we're live. Nick Pinizzotto, welcome to the East Meets West Hunt podcast. It's good to get to talk to you.
Well, it's good to be back again. I'm a fan of the show as well, and so thank you.
Yeah, no, definitely. The last time I was, the roles were reversed, and I was on your podcast through the National Deer Association. Coffee and Beer, is that what it's called?
We have two.
Which one was I on then?
You were on Coffee and Deer.
Yeah, okay.
And then Brian Grossman hosts our Deer Season 365 podcast. And people might say, well, why would you have two podcasts? Well, they're actually quite different. Brian's is more focused typically on the science of deer and sort of the academic part of it. And we are more focused on kind of the deer stories, the storytelling, and, the type of stuff that you're into. But, Grossman being a big time hunter, he does, he likes to creep into the hunting part of it sometimes too. So that's a really good show. So yeah, we have two of them.
I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know about the second one. I've listened to the Coffee and Deer one that you've been doing for a while there, but I didn't know about that second one. And I like to geek out on stuff, so I think that sounds like that might be a good one for me to check out.
Yeah, it definitely is. Brian's a great host, and his show I think is actually even is higher rated than Coffee and Deer. As much as I have to just swallow my pride and admit it. But so Brian, if you're listening, tipping my cap to you, buddy.
So for anyone that doesn't know, Nick is the president and CEO of the National Deer Association. And Nick, I'd like for you to give a little bit of background on yourself, kind of how you got into this role here, and what I guess your whole background.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And that's always you would think that would be an easy question to answer, but for me that ends up being a difficult one. So yeah, my path to being the CEO of the NDA. So I'll say a lot of passion, a little bit of luck, but it's a good spot to be. My entire career has been in conservation. And so for the first part of it, first 11 years of my career, actually maybe first 15 years of my career was more focused on water conservation. Even though always being a lifetime avid deer hunter, particularly archery hunting, I'm a native Pennsylvanian like yourself, so we have that in common. And I think everybody deer hunts here, so
yeah,
you get it honestly. And then I went and got an opportunity to get more in the wildlife side of things. I was the CEO of Delta Waterfowl Foundation. So I moved from Pennsylvania to Bismarck, North Dakota. Those two places are not the same, in case you were wondering. And did the waterfowl thing for a while. Then I moved back to east, Midwest, I guess, to Columbus, Ohio. Was the CEO of the Sportsman's Alliance, fighting the anti-hunters. So that was kind of a cool gig for a while. And then when they started the National Deer Alliance, this would have been, I guess, back in like 2014. I was the first and ended up being the only CEO of that group, and we were focused on deer, but deer policy. And the QDMA was still going at that time, and so we had QDMA focused on the types of things that NDA is doing now, the deer science, the branches, education, outreach, that type of thing, and the Deer Alliance focused on policy. So it was a good team. And then I think, as everybody knows at this point, we merged here a couple years ago now and created the National Deer Association. And so that's my path. I've got, I think as I look at it, like 25 years now or something like that in my career. It's flown really fast. But, working with deer on an everyday basis and the outstanding team of people I get to work with, talking with people like you, I don't take it for granted. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, it's cool. When I first started talking with you a little bit on Instagram, and then was on your podcast, getting to know you a little bit, and I didn't realize your extensive past that you had in these other organizations. I knew about the Sportsman's Alliance and everything else, but how did you? Well, actually, first I have to say I did a podcast with Brad Luttrell from Go Wild. I don't know if you know Brad at all. Not too long ago, we were talking about some different organizations, and we were talking about NDA, and I realized, even I missed this in the editing, twice I said National Deer Alliance out of the three times that I said it, and I caught it afterwards, and I still kind of go back. I always screw up those names as I'm trying to, even though it's been a couple years that the merge has happened, getting those names correct. But
That happens. And yeah, I mean, I mean, in one sense, it's good because we made an impact in our 5 years as the Alliance, and people started to catch on to what it was. And that's why we stayed pretty close to the name when we did the merger. It just made sense. And, so we've just rolled with it. And yeah, that's close enough. I think most people get it.
yeah, no, definitely. And so talk a little bit about, before we go into NDA a little bit about like your kind of past growing up deer hunting in Pennsylvania and that deer hunting, heritage that we have there. So how did you grow up? Did you grow up deer hunting from a very young age? How did that kind of work out?
Yeah, I definitely am a person that grew up with deer hunting. In my mind, I was deer hunting well before I was even allowed to deer hunt, before I was 12. Having the luck of growing up in rural Western Pennsylvania, I had deer and deer hunting right in my backyard. There was a Christmas tree farm right behind the house. I would often go out there and just sort of scout around and be around deer from as soon as I was allowed to go up by myself. Yeah, I started doing that. So, I began officially hunting at the age of 12. Always had a super strong passion for deer. I'm just fascinated by them. I still am to this day. Always trying to learn more. I tend to gravitate towards these things that you can't really master. And as we all know with deer hunting, and I'm also hugely competitive. I was an athlete, and I also continue to be a coach. And so I have those competitive juices. And I always look at, for example, every deer I'm pursuing is a new opponent, a new opportunity. And they're just so smart, and to get out there with them on their playing field is awesome. And I've always been driven by that. That's what excites me about deer. And I mean, archery hunting is my big passion. I do gun hunt, just not as much. But so it's very similar, I guess, to you and your path, and your passion and the way you do things is the way I like to do things. And so I think that's why we hit it off. So
Yeah, no, definitely. And so why did you decide to go down the path of like conservation and policy and everything at the beginning? Like what drove you to kind of go down that path?
that's a great question, and I don't get asked that too often. And so it's kind of funny story though. I remember all the way back in high school, I was an incredibly average student. I mean, incredibly average. Somewhere in we had like 150 kids in my graduating class, and I was somewhere in the middle of that. But I was just an underachiever. The formal education process didn't excite me. I was always looking out the window, figuring how could I get out and go hunting and fishing. But I remember in our guidance office, it wasn't like it is now where you search the internet and look for careers and that type of thing. I just knew I needed to go to school or else I was going to be in a career I probably didn't like. And so it was a necessary evil for me. I went down though into the guidance office and they had this little program that you could answer all these questions and at the end it would spit out what you should be. And doggone it, every time I did it, mine kept spitting out that I needed to be a farmer. And then I started to think that the program was rigged because, most of the kids in my school district were farmers. That's where I grew up. I'm like, they just want me to stay here and be a farmer. And so, ironically now as a property owner and someone doing food plots and so on, I guess I do a little bit of farming. But I knew I wanted to do something outdoors and in conservation. I had this deep passion for hunting and fishing, and I knew that I wanted to do something to give back to that. And so I stuck to that. I didn't veer away and chase other things that may have paid more money at the time. And in the long run, it's paid off. And it's been a very rewarding conservation career, and it's fun now having this many years into it. That even the other day, for example, we released a nuisance bear. I was working with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. We released a nuisance bear on a piece of land that we did conservation work on. And I thought that was really cool. So I'm old enough now to have some of that legacy to look back and see some of that work and say, yeah, I was part of that. So that's been pretty neat.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so what did you end up going to college for?
Yeah, so I have a unique couple degrees. My bachelor's degree is in environmental geography. I started out in biology, but then I forgot the part where I wasn't really any good at math. And so, I maybe should have looked at that in the first place. Maybe I should have paid a little more attention in high school. But anyway, environmental geography was my bachelor's degree. And my master's degree is a little unique. It's actually in psychology. And so people would say, well, why in the world, how did you end up in psychology? Well, it was a couple of things. I mean, one, I mentioned my sports background. I was always fascinated by the mentality of athletes and what made them click and what made the great ones great kind of a thing. But the other thing I thought of was every single thing we do involves people. And you asked about policy. Now, and I've never gotten excited about policy. Thank God we have Torrin Miller on our team now that handles all this for us.
Yeah.
But I understand it, and I always like trying to get into someone's mind and figure out why it is they have a position that they have, and try to frankly exploit that in some cases if I have to. How you answer a question matters, that type of thing. What makes a person click? And every single thing that we do, psychology is a part of it. Even when we're managing deer, even if you're asking permission to hunt deer on someone's property, there's a psychological aspect to it. And so that's why I chose that as a master's. So that's my educational background.
Ah, that's really interesting. It's funny when I first went to college, my original plan was to do environmental sciences with the geology track. I was always, excited about that side of it, and then eventually kind of switched to go and I wasn't great in some of the different labs and the math and stuff that had associated with it. I had all, like in high school, I had every advanced calculus, all those things they had to do. I just hated it. And I was like, I don't know about this. And I ended up getting a safety degree. And then once I got into working in manufacturing, I learned that environmental kind of came, hand in hand with that. So I went to just like some separate courses through the state of Pennsylvania to learn air quality and water quality and waste and got into that. And now I'm not doing that anymore. But I learned that I liked the environmental side, besides the fact that everything had to do with math again and figuring out the air emissions and all those other portions. And that part did not excite me. I looked at the environmental side when I went to it is because I liked being outside. And that was kind of just how it clicked in my head, was I wanted to do that route. But, going back to like you talking about the psychology side, I think that's so important, and I've been trying to learn more on that side and reading books and trying to understand like people and talking to people. This, what I'm doing with the podcast here, but like even with having discussions on things when you don't necessarily agree with people or trying to understand other people's perspectives and where they come from. And I think that's a very challenging thing, and I can see how that would be really beneficial to have that background in your line of work. And I've really been trying to get up to speed more on understanding policy and being involved in it, just trying to do my part, I guess, in that front from the conservation side with deer and with any other type of species and hunting in general. And as things become even more so under attack with hunters and just everything else, just trying to understand that portion. And it's difficult for me personally to grasp all of it and try to understand some of these things. So I definitely think your path that you've come to this point even is something admirable to I guess see from the outside.
You said a lot of really good things there. I want to go back to something, though, in your initial question, because I get it a lot from just talking to people. How do I get into doing that? Someone that's into hunting and whatnot. And I would say one thing you have to do, and you've done this even in your career, hearing your story there, is sometimes too you don't force things, right? You have a passion and you stay close to that, but you also need to organically kind of let things happen. You got to read the tea leaves. You got to just see what's happening out there and react and take advantage of opportunities. And when I think about you and how you get yourself within within the bow range of a really mature buck in these habitats that you're hunting in, these mountain bucks, that is really hard. Okay, I know. I live here. I get it. I understand it. Some of your listeners will never understand it. But you get there because you don't force things. You get there because you read what's in front of you and you react. And I would say that's very much the same way for anyone that wants to do this type of thing for a career, because there's no degree for CEO of a conservation organization. You just have to sort of, and there's not a degree for what you do necessarily.
No.
And so you read the tea leaves, you read the sign, you don't force it, and you let it lead you to good places. And so I would just offer that bit of advice.
No, I think that's really good advice for anybody, because there's no you're not going to go to your guidance counselor in high school and be able to figure out a direct path to these sort of things, and I think it's just like the little stepping stones as you go, and putting yourself in the right places and being willing to work on things that might not be necessarily right down the path, but have like this kind of fringe type mentality with it, and eventually moving your way into it. And if you're driven by it and you keep working at it over time, you'll get there.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, so let's switch a little bit here to NDA and kind of the mission behind NDA. It's been something that, as I look at a lot of the different conservation organizations out there, the ones that I'm a part of, since the beginning, that's been one of the things that I've wanted to do was find a way that I can give back to those things. One is being able to talk to people like yourself on the podcast and give exposure to it, but also on the financial side, like NDA has been it was QDMA and now NDA that I've been donating the 3% of the apparel sales that I get on a specific quarter to those organizations, which at this point it's not like it's a substantial amount of money or anything, but it's a small way to be able to give back. But I've chosen NDA because I believe in their mission and everything that you're doing. So I'd like for you to be able to talk a little bit about NDA and what the reasoning is behind it.
Sure. And yeah, I mean, $1 is a substantial contribution to me as I see it. And so it's not about the dollar amount as much as it's the gesture. You think enough of us to do that. That's huge. That's more important than money, right? I mean, we need money, but we also need the passion and the drive to get it done. So thank you for that. Our mission is very simple. And when we went through strategic planning, we did the merger. You see some groups, they have these big, long mission statements, and they try to get it all in there. And I'm glad we did the opposite. It's just a very direct mission, and that is ensure the future of wild deer, wildlife habitat, and hunting. Period.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot of things involved in that, but I think one of the first things I'd say about us is that I try to take a step back and look at who we are. And I'm really proud of who we are. I think we're a darn good organization personally. I'm a life member and was well before I ever was sitting in the seat I'm sitting in now. And I just think that if you are a deer hunter and you're interested in deer and you care about the sport, I mean, goodness, for 30, $35, you can be a member of an organization that does an awful lot for deer. And so, my sales pitch is that simple. Like it's a small amount to do a big thing for deer and hunting, and that's the entire reason we exist.
Yeah. No, and I think that's cool. I've got to know and meet like some other people within the organization, you know, through yourself and Torin, you mentioned him earlier. Him and I email back and forth all the time because he hunts some similar countries as I do during deer season, and we're always emailing back and forth talking about it. And I've actually hunted some specific areas that he does, so we've went back and forth talking about it. And it just seems like everybody within the organization is super passionate about it. Again, very simple with the mission statement on that. And as everyone is super busy and has all these things, going on, it's hard to be fully involved in every issue that's popping up. So this is where, something simple as buying a $35 membership a year can let, people like yourself and your team to be able to, kind of handle some of those things and be able to do the research and put out the information to be able to, understand that, I guess.
Well, you mentioned policy earlier, and you brought up Torin. By the way, don't let him know what kind of truck you drive, because he might start showing up in your spots.
Yeah, I know that's. No, I'm just kidding.
But yeah, no. So it's policy is an example of that. Torin is our policy guy, quickly becoming one of the top policy guys in the country in the conservation world, which we're all really proud of him, and it's exciting to watch him do that. But with his work, he makes it so easy that all you have to do is go and a couple of clicks of the mouse, and you're sending a letter to your legislator on an important issue. That stuff that we do, that doesn't happen for free, right? We have to pay Torin to do that, and people to get it up there on the website and whatnot. And so, yeah, I mean, we're not the organization. I think we still have to overcome this over time. We are not the organization that the earliest versions of QDMA was, where people really felt like they had to own property and had to do hardcore management. We are way, way more diverse than that now. And if you just spend 5 minutes on our website and see the things we're focused on things like, we still do that stuff. Don't get me wrong. We are still the best resource for that type of information, but we're the best resource to give you the latest deer science and help you interpret it. We are the best resource, I feel, for bringing new hunters into the mix. So we do a lot of hunter recruitment through our Field to Fork program. Just had some tremendous success with that. Just general information about deer is important. Even if you don't hunt deer, we do an awful lot of communication about why deer are so important and the amount of money that they generate. If you're someone that watches birds in Ithaca, New York, you should still care about deer, because a lot of money that goes to your state wildlife agency is derived from the sale of deer hunting licenses and people that buy gear to hunt deer. We may get into this later, but we talk about our deer report. We know that almost 80% of all people who buy a hunting license are going to hunt deer. That's pretty freaking awesome. And to have an organization like us that is focused on deer is kind of a cool thing. So if you're hearing this for the first time, just check us out and see what we're all about.
Yeah, no, and I think that's something that, even for myself, when I used to always think of QDMA, like I always had a membership, but I always just kind of thought it was just focused around, private land management, and, and a lot of it isn't. I think there's a lot of very good, information on that side, but at the same time, yeah, NDA is way bigger than just that. And I'm not saying just that is that's, saying that's not important. It is, but like there's so much more to it. And that the deer report that we'll jump into here in a little bit, like I love going through that. Like I've been doing research for a company, Spartan Forge, that anybody listens to the podcast knows about, and they have deer data research, and I utilize the reports that you guys are doing and other state organizations to look through that stuff, and it's very interesting to see all that data and be able to understand the importance behind some of that data that's there as far as for the entire deer, wild deer population and the health of the herd and everything else from that standpoint. And as I've continued to learn more about, habitat and everything. This doesn't just apply to private lands as far as understanding that. I've become really good friends with a forester that helps manage, public lands and also private lands, and from the timber aspect of it, and understanding that there's so many things that when you create habitat and everything for deer, you're helping everything else in the same respect. It's not just I want to be a more successful deer hunter. That might be your goal, but in the whole grand scheme of things, you're helping in a lot of other aspects as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we take a lot of pride in that deer report, and I'm glad that you're checking it out.
Oh yeah, definitely. But right before I want to dive into that, there's a couple of like key points that I know that you focus on, and one of them is the education aspect and the outreach aspect, and being able to put out that reliable information for hunters, and trying to engage them in wildlife stewardship, and just like and being involved in it. So talk a little bit about like the education standpoint and some of the resources that you have there.
Yeah, so one of the cool things I was mentioning this to our team the other day. It's funny when I go to look for something that I need to learn about deer, I go to our website, or if I do a Google search for it, oftentimes it's our website that comes up among the, if not the top, among the top. And so it's funny, we're kind of fans of each other here for different reasons, right? And so it just kind of works out really well. But yeah, education is critically important to us. It's a big part of our mission. We want people to be aware of a lot of cool things about deer, right? Someone may be hunting their entire life and not really truly understand something as simple as why fawns are born when they're born, and why they have spots, or why they have so many spots, right? That's cool information. Sometimes it's more heavy, like chronic wasting disease, and man, nobody wants to talk about that. And I know that if we sat here and talked about CWD here, your show numbers are going to drop because it's bad news, right? That's part of the psychology of it. Nobody wants to talk about COVID either, right? We're tired of talking about that. And so, but the reality is someone has to be responsible to compile the science that's out there and help interpret it. And so on that example alone, CWD, we've done a ton of stuff where we'll take the hardcore science and we'll put it in the form of a short video where someone can get the simple answer to what CWD is and why it matters, why they should care about it. Other research, deer movement. This is a really critical thing for hunters, right? Like you want to know, we had a talk about Brian Grossman's podcast earlier. He had a guest on talking about sedentary deer versus deer that move more, and how deer have these different personalities, right? And those of us that are hunting, especially the way you hunt, Beau, you've hunted bucks with different personalities, right? And so that requires different approaches. So some of it's more fun. Now, we're not the ones doing the research, although we do participate in research. We talk about the psychology. I've been part of a couple recent papers where we've done some research why hunters perceive things, or how they perceive things a certain way. That's always fun. So we do involve ourselves with it, but we do a lot of interpretation of stuff that would come out from like Mississippi State Deer Lab, or University of Georgia Deer Lab, or Penn State. Some of these schools more known for that type of thing, and we work with those folks. We know those people. Dr. Craig Harper out of Tennessee. A lot of people I think that he works for us. No, he's actually a professor at Tennessee, and so we're using his stuff all the time. So the education is important. People are into it, and like I said, it's all the way from the basics of just basic deer 101 all the way up to the more heavy stuff, to telling cool stories about a deer that did a 3-state excursion and it ended up 200 miles from home, that type of thing. So that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I love taking in that information that you guys put out there on that. And I saw recently, I haven't got to listen to it yet, but had Dwayne Diefenbach from Pennsylvania, from PSU. They're on the podcast to talk, and I've had him on a couple years ago because I've always just subscribed to his reports and talking about caller deer data and like looking at all of that. And I think it's incredible information, and being able to learn and understand that a little bit is pretty cool. And especially for people that are, I say especially people that are new hunters, but even like someone like ourselves that have hunted our whole lives, like you get so much information out of that and understanding. But because it's like there is deer that they blow my mind. Oh, just about every deer blows my mind, but like of what they do and why, some of them are, roamers and spending more time, in the rut covering miles, and I'll have them on, 3 different cameras, 2.5 miles apart in one day during the rut. And then there's other ones that just kind of stay home and like, they have doe groups in their particular area that they mess around with, and they don't really have a reason to go out and be more aggressive and cover ground. So it's cool to get to kind of look at that and be able to understand it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even always just direct deer stuff either. I mean, so for example, we were just emailing about this morning. Lindsey Thomas, our chief communications officer, he did a little video on feral hogs and a unique trap called the pig brig that's worked really well for them in the South. Now, luckily, this isn't a problem for us in Pennsylvania, but we were just seeing there's 108,000 views on that here just recently. So, and it's like thousands per day. It's not just deer hunters getting that information, it's other people getting that information. So the education also can be pretty broad, and we do, I think, a pretty good job of getting the word out.
Yeah, no, and I think too, like in bridging that gap, and being able to, how do I want to put this? Be able to appeal to both the hardcore deer hunters as well as just the average people, and understanding what you're doing for just deer in general and wildlife in general. I think that is that's an important thing, and I think that's something that you guys do well. And another aspect too, outside of the educational portion, which it kind of goes hand in hand, but is the whole, R3 side of it, with recruitment, retention, and reactivation. And explain a little bit about that program and what the importance of that is for you guys in NDA.
Yeah, and so the Field to Fork program is what you're asking about.
Yes.
And it's a program that we are very fond of. We're very proud of it. We just had a board meeting in Springfield, Missouri, and when we brought that topic up as a strategic discussion, you can just see the energy in the room come up, because we've had a ton of success. Actually, we've had so much success that our challenge is, how do we capitalize on that and have more success without making our entire organization about Field to Fork, right? So it's actually, because it's successful, it also creates its own set of challenges. And so, yeah, I mean, very simply put, that program is focused on getting new hunters into the woods, but it's not a youth program. And so for a long time, and I'm not saying that there isn't value in youth programs, there certainly is, but for a long time, when we said, let's get new hunters into the woods, what we started doing was a whole bunch of youth programs, but the kids that would show up were kids that were already in hunting families. And we're giving them a bunch of gear and saying, hey, we want you to be a hunter. And they were going to already be a hunter anyway. And so our program focuses a little bit more on, well, totally on adults and people who have the ability to buy their own gear and take themselves to a hunting spot. And it started with a farmer's market in Georgia where we offered some venison to people, and they were into that. And then we just asked the next question, well, would you ever be interested in getting your own? And man, so many people said, well, yeah, that's something I've always wanted to try to do. And I can't tell you how many times in my life I run into people that know that I'm a deer hunter, and they say, I've always wanted to try that, never had a chance. Or maybe I have someone come in and do some work on the house, and they see my taxidermy, and they say, well, that's really cool. That's something I've always wanted to try to do. Well, there are millions and millions of people out there who say that, and they just simply need someone to give them a chance and show them how. And so we have events all across the country. We had events. Hank's going to kill me. I don't give you the right number. I want to say 41 events or something along those lines last year, where we are out there showing people how easy it is to hunt deer, all the way through teaching them firearms and crossbow safety, all the way up through how to field dress an animal, how to prepare it for a meal. And we're showing that the majority of those people that go through that program, then they go and they hunt themselves. And so I would encourage people, if you just go to our website, just go to deerassociation.com and type in Field to Fork, you're going to see some of those successes. We did a really great video from the event we did in Missouri last year that really depicts what we do with that well. It literally, as we're talking here, I got an email from my board chairman. It just come in, and the subject line is Field to Fork. So I'm really glad that you asked about that program. We can't do all of those, by the way. If you're at a local sportsman's club and you want to do a Field to Fork, we will help you figure out how to do that. So it's not that we do them all. We just want to sort of pass it on and have other people doing them. So, yeah, it's been a great program for us.
Yeah, and so you talked about it a little bit, but explain a little bit the importance of that and getting those, people in, specifically adults, but getting them, into hunting. What do you see like is the big, importance of being able to do that?
I think number one, it's no secret that hunter numbers in general have declined. It's stabilized here recently within a few percentage points, which is good. But we also talked earlier in this podcast about the importance of deer hunting, the fact that 8 out of 10 people that buy a hunting license hunt deer. And if we have less deer hunters, that's less money for conservation in general. And I know that's a lot for people to wrap their heads around, but the reality is, a lot of the people buying guns or buying them to hunt deer, right? And so there's a portion of that money that goes through the Pittman-Robertson federal excise tax that comes back to state wildlife agencies to manage wildlife. The purchasing of a hunting license, if we know that 8 out of 10 people that buy a hunting license are going to hunt deer, that's all those people, all that money that's going toward broad wildlife conservation. So we need deer hunters to number one, pass on the legacy of deer hunting. It's not about, some people get confused and they get selfish about it and they say, oh, they're going to be overrun with hunters and it's going to take my hunting spot. And that's an incredibly short-sighted way of looking at it. There's plenty of room for people. We need deer hunters. Conservation needs deer hunters. And every time you lose one, that's a certain percentage that comes off the top for broad wildlife conservation. So deer hunting matters to everybody. And we feel it's our responsibility to do our own small part to get people out into deer woods.
Yeah, and I think even more recently I've been hearing a lot about that and people saying, oh, we have enough hunter numbers. I'm seeing, so many people out in my hunting spots and all these things. And I feel like even in the past, like when I was younger, didn't fully understand it. I was like the same way, like, oh, wouldn't it be better to not have as many deer hunters because my spots will be, a lot better. But that is a very nearsighted kind of selfish approach to it. And what I guess you kind of already answered that, but I was going to say how you would, say to people that are like, oh, well, I'm seeing more, people in my hunting spots. And I know it's like definitely a thing that's, going on, out west with people, getting involved in it. But the numbers show, like, I mean, you look at that deer report and you look at the drop and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me here, but there was like, some of the states, it was like a 40% decrease in hunters. I wanted to say it was like Massachusetts or Rhode Island or some of those states there, that there was a pretty drastic decrease in hunters over the last few years. And even Connecticut had a 46% in the last 4 years drop. Tennessee, Rhode Island, Georgia, Nebraska were all in that kind of in that list there. And I guess I don't totally understand, when you see like in areas that, that you're like, oh, there was 12 trucks at this, trailhead or whatever on this piece of public land, why that's the case. I'm not exactly sure. Do you have an answer for that?
I don't. I think a couple things with that. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I would say one thing, some of the data in the deer report, just so everyone understands, we are limited by what we get from state wildlife agencies and how they collect the data. So some of those numbers may be skewed. And in our report, we're talking about deer numbers too. And so some states, depending on how they ask it, is it strictly just based on license sales, that type of thing. So I would hold some of those with a grain of salt. Some of them, it's because there are so few deer hunters in the first place. So you mentioned Rhode Island. It's tiny, but there's still 5,000 deer hunters in that state. So The numbers are the numbers that we're putting back out that we get from the states, and we do try to verify as much as we can. In terms of, especially out west or public lands where people feel like they're seeing a lot more people, um, part of that is because number one, we have such good resources. There's been a huge push for, hey, there's public land out there, and there are easy ways to find it. There are different apps out there that show you how to find public land, makes it easier. There are pushes by organizations about public land and their availability. So I think that's part of it. People are understanding how to put in and draw for tags now. But I also think that it gets overblown a little bit. I'll use our own example just here in Pennsylvania. I own a piece of property that is adjoining to about 3,000 acres of state game land. And I can tell you that on the opening day of gun season, yes, you're going to have, a dozen trucks at the various pull-off spots. But then I'm going to tell you that by the middle of that week, it's down to one or two, and by the end of the week, it's almost zero. During archery season, it's the same way. I encounter very few people throughout the year on those lands. If you look at the whole big picture of things, that can also tell you that of the 3,000 acres, that I can draw a line around the probably 300 acres that's actually getting utilized on that 3,000 acres. And
Yep.
so, you see a vehicle and someone might be spending some time there. That does not necessarily mean an area is getting overhunted or anything like that. And so there's plenty, I guess is what I would tell people. And if you do have an area, and I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, where maybe you've been hunting a spot, now all of a sudden you have a bunch of company, well, there's your opportunity then to go find the next spot that doesn't have that. And so, I think that it does happen. I think people are more aware. And I think people in the West aren't used to seeing that necessarily, but there's still plenty.
Yeah, and I talked about this on a few podcasts here recently, specifically around the Western hunting aspect. But it's like, all right, the people that have been successful for years are still being successful because they're just adapting to it, and that's just, we look at things and be like, oh, the pressure's so bad, at this spot, but that's happened for years. It's just it kind of fluctuates between areas. Yeah, maybe something gets press and it makes it, more people going to that area, but yeah, that means there's less people somewhere else. So like, that's how I've always looked at it with Pennsylvania. And besides, gun season and stuff, Pennsylvania, what they have I might be incorrect on this, but the most deer hunters in the country, or the highest percentage of like per square mile, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
And so like, the highest deer number is second to Texas, as I'm looking at the report here. And Texas is a giant state, so Pennsylvania is a little bit more crowded from that. But I never have a whole lot of issues with that. Yeah, there'll be areas that get more pressure than others, and it's just like, yeah, you just kind of got to use that. You can use that to your advantage, and that's one of my good friends and respected deer hunters, Johnny Stewart. He always says that. He's like, quit worrying about the people. Just use the people to your advantage, and that's how you can look at it. And I think a lot of that does come down to perspective.
Yeah. I mean, the number you were fishing for there, I think, was hunters per square mile. I think Michigan is like a tenth of a percentage point more than Pennsylvania in hunters per square mile. And in terms of total hunting numbers, yeah, you mentioned Texas, and Pennsylvania is the top two. Interestingly, Texas is a gigantic state, obviously, 770,000, and Pennsylvania has 663. I don't know how many Pennsylvanians you can fit in Texas, but it's a few. And then Wisconsin is right after that, about 620,000. New York over 500,000. Michigan over 500,000. So those are your top five states there.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, but I did want to go back to something that you said, that, and I know this could be an entire podcast, but I do want to talk about I guess the challenges to deer hunting and deer population in general. And you talked about deer disease, being right up towards the top of that. So giving a little bit of kind of the state of the union on the deer diseases here in 2022.
Yep. And so I will come back to diseases. I do want to say that I want to say something in terms of biggest threats to deer and hunting. I want to initially give you a different answer, if that's okay, and then
Yeah.
I'll jump back to CWD and maybe EHD. But I think diseases and habitat loss are easy answers to that. What are our threats? But I also think complacency in the awareness of deer and their value, even complacency by hunters to just always assume that deer are healthy and things are going to be the way they always are. And so we can't be that way. We can't be complacent. We have to pay attention to policy, as boring as it may be to a lot of people listening. We have to participate in that. We have to know more about deer and why they matter. We have to understand the big picture of conservation. We need to tell people about it. So I do worry about complacency in this false sense of, well, there are always deer to hunt, so I'm going to not worry about deer. But then back to the disease issue, yeah, it's not good news about chronic wasting disease. It's not. I mean, we're adding new states on the regular. We've added 2 or 3 new ones here just in recent months. And so it's not unrealistic to think that it's just going to be everywhere at some point. And then it comes down to, are we willing to manage it? My personal property is in a CWD management zone, and because of that, I have to take certain steps that might cause me a little bit more work in order to not take that disease out of the area. But it is what it is, and you adapt to it. And so I think we just got to be willing to let's not go down the path of, and you hear this a lot, well, it's just a political disease, or this is something made up, or that's lazy thinking. Let's not go down that path. That's not going to help anybody. We feel that way, and this is the psychology part of it, because it's bad news. Like, nobody likes to believe bad news. And it is bad news. I get it. I don't want to deal with it either. But we have to do our steps as hunters to try to manage it. It's also not the end of the world news either. Let's put it out there that way. It's not the end of deer hunting, but we certainly would like to try to keep it contained the best we can until we can learn more about it and come up with some better solutions. But it's not great news on the CWD front. The EHD front, so it's very different. First of all, it is not a 100% fatal disease. People freak out about it because what happens is, if they have a local kill, they see it, they smell it, and it looks like all the deer have died. And in some cases, a lot of them do, but as a herd, they will bounce back from it. CWD is 100% fatal, and you don't see mass die-offs with CWD, and so people get confused. I will say that EHD, though, is so far this year has been quiet. I want to knock on wood right now, because I would like to keep it that way. That would be ideal. But this is the time of the year where we start potentially hearing problems with EHD, getting into late summer where you have drought conditions. And so, you want to pay attention and sort of monitor what's happening out there. But so far, as we get in here to early July, we haven't heard a ton, and we'd like to keep it that way. So those are the two main ones. TB is another one, but that's, it's not one that we talk about a ton. But really, those are the two main ones I think that deer hunters are most familiar with and want to hear about.
Yeah, and what can we do to help with that? Like, what is that? Just kind of paying attention to what your local regulations are surrounding that, and making sure you follow that. I mean, I know, like, with Pennsylvania and not bringing back, body parts of deer from other states into Pennsylvania, based off of the thoughts on that. And then also, areas with baiting, as far as, not baiting during hunting seasons, that's not allowed in Pennsylvania, but, in some areas restricting, baiting, and the way I understand it is because you don't want to congregate the deer and have the chance of spreading disease that way. So it kind of give your thought on that, as far as what we can do that's, simple for deer hunters. Like, what can we do to be able to help that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to the awareness thing, which is so important. Go to your state wildlife agency's website. Look up their information on chronic wasting disease. It'll show you where their management areas are, what their rules are. Know, for example, that you can't live in Pennsylvania and go to Ohio and shoot a deer and just drive the whole deer back. That's illegal. You can't do that. You can't do that in a lot of states. You can bring back the deer. You got to bring back certain parts, and you got to take certain steps to deal with it. But you can't just bring the whole deer back, as one example. I would just point people, so that we don't dominate your whole show with chronic wasting disease. I would tell people, go to our website and look up CWD. We have what's called a CWD resource center there. It's full of short little videos that are less than a minute long that answer a lot of the basic questions about chronic wasting disease. And you're going to find a whole bunch of things that you can do to help do your part. For me personally, for example, where I live is not a CWD zone. Where I hunt is. And so when I bring my deer home, I have to make sure that it's quartered and that I'm not bringing things like the spine or the whole head back. If it's the type of deer that I would like to get taxidermied, what I have to do is fully cape the deer. I can bring the cape back and the antlers back as long as the skull plate's clean to a taxidermist anywhere, or I could use a taxidermist in that area to have it done that way. And so there are options for things you need to do there. So those are just a couple of examples. Again, it's not the end of the world. It's just some extra steps that you need to take. You mentioned baiting in some areas of the country. That's a big deal. And so, yes, I mean, CWD, it's funny. Maybe funny is not the right way to say it, but deer contract CWD from each other, much like we all pass COVID and other things to each other. And so social distancing of deer is important. And so obviously a big bait pile where deer are sticking their face in that and sharing saliva and all those things does not help.
Yeah.
So that's just one example.
Yeah, no, that's how I was kind of comparing it in my mind there. But I didn't want to say the word COVID out loud because then it would probably get, fact checked or something online. But so yeah, no, I wanted to bring that up because I think, obviously it is an important topic and just kind of get people thinking about it. And as with my show and helping people plan out of state hunts and all these different things, like pay attention to that in your planning and your hunt planning, making sure you have that figured out. If you're not able to boil the skull yourself out there or do something, you need to make sure you know where local taxidermist is and plan for that ahead of time, rather than going out of state for a day onto a hunt and then just getting a deer and thinking you're just going to drive back with it, because that's depending on where you're at, that's illegal, and just making sure you're doing your part with that. So I did want to bring that up a lot for that reason. But to dive a little bit more into like the deer report, is some things that jumped out at me as I think would be interesting for people to hear is the number of bucks that are being harvested at that 3.5 years or older range now has grown. And one, I want to ask you the importance of that and what the reasoning is behind it, because I think that can be skewed a little bit sometimes. And then why you think you see that happening now.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is just it's two things. It's education. Our organization has been around almost 40 years now, when you combine the QDMA and NDA. And so we've led a lot of the education about the importance of balanced age classes in deer herds, especially if you're a hunter. It makes for a more sort of as nature intended balance of things out there. It makes your hunting better. It makes it more exciting. And the hunting part of it is also hunters now, as time has gone on and maybe some states have had an antler restriction or whatever and sort of forced them to pass younger deer, have caught on to the idea that it's a heck of a lot of fun to hunt mature deer. And if you are willing to be patient a little bit, you're going to see a lot of things and have the experience of a lot of things that is really the type of deer hunting that maybe for most people before that they only saw on television. And so it's important for a lot of those reasons. The other reason, and a lot of people miss this point, I think, is that because people desire personally, even on their private property, better deer herds, healthier deer herds, and balanced deer herds, they are voluntarily spending boatloads of money, myself included, embarrassing amounts of money on improving their land. And so they're doing conservation work that, as you brought up earlier, it benefits a whole lot of things. Like on my property, I have a really nice grouse population, which there aren't a lot of people that can raise their hand and say, oh, I got a lot of grouse right now. I mean, they're hurting in a lot of places. So I have that. I've got a lot of woodcock passing through. I've got bears. I've got bobcats. I've got coyotes. Now people are like, well, why would you want those things? I do want those things because I like having all of that wildlife on my place. And you know what's amazing? When you have good habitat, you can have all of those things and you can still have lots of deer. And so people voluntarily, because they want a better age class of deer, are harvesting more does as they should be. They're letting younger bucks get older. And so it's hard to find a negative reason to, or defined a negative to managing deer based on realistic age class.
Yeah, no, I think that's, that whole overall, like, management strategy is been, I mean, we've seen it here in Pennsylvania. Like, it's been awesome. And I think that, especially in, like, in some of these big woods areas, like where I'm at and where I do a lot of hunting and stuff, is like the amount of deer, the total deer numbers have been, drastically decreased from what they used to be 25 years ago. And that was always kind of taken as a negative connotation, but there's, a lot of benefits that I've seen from it. One is the deer are healthier, bigger bodies, just like they're able to get older, but the body size is a huge thing. And also, yeah, you do get the opportunity to be able to hunt bigger deer, older deer and stuff, that like the deer that, we're able to see now in Pennsylvania, and I'm just using this specifically with both of us, living there, is is drastically increasing and getting better. Like, I have an opportunity to go hunt a different state in October this year, and I've been throwing up and around. I'm like, I don't want to leave Pennsylvania until until I get a deer. And it's like, that sounds like wacky to say that out loud, but it's like we have some really good deer hunting, and I think the management's been great. I mean, last night I was driving around with my cousin. We were just driving out some forest roads, just out looking for deer and stuff, and in one area that had been managed really well from the timber aspect and everything else, it was like we saw deer, we saw some does, we saw some bucks. There was a bear in the same little plot there that was in the same clear cut that there was some deer in, and just turkey population. Everything else is just like full circle on that whole management aspect of it. And I think that's really cool, and I think that's helping out a lot, and for the overall experience, even as a deer hunter, and having that opportunity. Because even if you're like, oh, I don't really care what kind of buck that I shoot, that's fine, but you're lying if you say that, oh, I don't want to see a big deer. I don't want I don't want to see
Oh,
that.
right,
Like
right.
that gets you excited, and it's pretty cool to be able to see that. And like the antler restrictions, I think, has been such a beneficial aspect. And I talk to people in other states that don't have them, that wish that they would. It just kind of causes you to look a little bit more, and it almost adds a um I don't know. I think that has helped out a ton with the age structure and the health of the herd here in PA.
Yeah, I mean, it's real quick on antler restrictions. We prefer people to voluntarily do them because we see the numbers. We see, I mean, heck, we got some states over 80%, Oklahoma 83%, Louisiana 82% of all their deer, that their bucks are 3.5 years or older, right? So sometimes I think people are just naturally kind of gravitating toward that, and that's easier than forcing someone to do something. But to your point, in this state, because people were first forced to do it, they hated it for 5 minutes until they started shooting the best deer of their lives, and it was like all of a sudden now you poll people. I think it's almost 70% of the people support them. But anyway, I think the other thing that's really cool and interesting is that I hear so many more people talking about the age of the deer, even more so than the score of the rack. And that's pretty neat. It's almost like the grouse hunter, they measure their success by flushes, right? Like, oh, I had this many flushes. And it's even less about how many they actually hit, because they're darn
Yeah.
hard to hit when you shoot at them. But even I'll use an example. So on my property, and I'm sitting here and I'm watching trail camera pictures come in and all that, right?
Yeah.
And right now I've got two really nice bucks that I know are at least 4.5 years old. And they probably, by the time they're done growing, if they score 130, that would be surprising to me, because of just where they happen to be in the state. Okay. So I'm in a place where, and by the way, I mean, if I see either of these deer, that's the kind of deer I want. I want an older deer. I want that challenge, because that same deer, he's still a 4.5-year-old deer, and he's going to act like one. It don't matter what's on top of his head. And so sometimes if you live in Iowa, that 4-year-old deer is probably going to be 160 to 180 inches. But that deer's no smarter just because he has that bigger rack than the one that I'm after on my place that might be 140, right? Every once in a while, where I happen to live, I will have one walking around that looks similar to something that you shot recently. Okay.
Yeah.
They're out there, but that's not the rule. Okay. It's not the rules. So for me, my goals are I want an older age class deer and I want to shoot does. And I'm just as happy if he's 4.5 and it scores 125 inches as I am one that I would shoot in Iowa that's 3.5 years old and is 150 inches,
Yeah.
right? And so I hear a lot more people talking about the age of the deer. We're going to be putting out a brand new Age This video that's narrated by Kip Adams, and almost all of the video comes from Pennsylvania, ironically, of all these different age class deer. And I think that's going to be really popular. People are going to like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's no downside to managing deer, to letting them get a little bit older. Um, it's it's just really, I think, been a great thing for conservation, a great thing for the experience, for people to enjoy it. But at the same time, if you want to go out and you're happy shooting that fork horn buck, that's freaking awesome too. I mean, just get out there and you do you. And we're seeing that the higher percentage of people are going after older deer, but it's fine if you're not too. I don't want anyone to hear this and say, well, that's how you have to do it. Just do you, get out there, participate, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, but there's so much importance to that. You're helping in so many different aspects by just being out there, as far as for deer hunting, and and then maybe eventually get there. There was a point where I didn't care about it, and as far as age structure or anything, and then as you start getting more deer, it's like, okay, maybe I want to start, whether it's a challenge or whatever else. Like, so I'm turning my computer here for you to see it a little bit there. But that buck on the wall right there, he's 125-inch 9-point with like a 13-inch spread. And he was aged at, I can't remember if he was 8.5 or 9.5 years old. So, like, that's, talking about how sometimes, age doesn't necessarily mean they have these giant racks. And I did have photos of him the year before, and he was a little bit bigger, but he was never, he was never 150, 160-inch deer, at that point. And it's just, that's the way it was. And I think that deer was from 2009, so that was a long time ago. But, yeah, they get that way. I have another one on the wall that was 5.5, and he was 124, maybe 125-inch 8-point, and that's just what he was. And I do like that people are talking about the age structure more so than the inches, because it does depend on where you're at in the country and what they have available to them.
Yeah, and that's where getting to know your deer. That's why the trail camera stuff, and we're so adamant about keeping trail cameras a part of hunting, and there's been some debate on that, and won't get into that here. But because we have those tools now, we can better manage our herds and be aware of, we know what deer are now because we've watched them grow up. And I can think back when I lived in Ohio, and that's not a bad place to live to hunt deer, by the way.
No.
I shot one buck that I know he was 5.5 years old, and his rack is awful. It's like he's got like all this mass coming up, but he's got these goofy points on the ends, and man, I was so proud of that buck because he weighed about 200 and almost 280 pounds. Big giant neck on him, and like I said, he had this mass, but he's not going to score for anything. I shot a couple out there like that, and then whenever I skinned that deer, I realized he had an injury in his neck. It looked like he might have been hit by a bullet at one time, and that probably was why his antlers never came along. There was another buck I was aware of out there that was 8 years old. I watched that deer for 5 years, and only ever laid eyes on him once. And by the time he was 8, he was a shadow of what he was when he was 5 or 6. Does that any less of a deer than, I mean, my goodness, no. And I love that story of that buck that you showed me. Unfortunately, the listeners can't see it.
Yeah.
That's an awesome deer. I mean, that is incredible and a great accomplishment. And it doesn't matter, what his score is. To match wits and to get close to an animal like that, that's freaking awesome. Kip Adams, who is probably the most popular guy we have on the NDA team, his son Beau shot a doe that was older than he was because they sent the tooth away. I mean, that is so cool. I just love those stories, and deer are just cool, and I'm getting excited here. Just talking about it, so.
It was funny during last rifle season. Usually about a day every year, I go and I hang out with a friend of mine, Kip Folks, who has a big property here in Pennsylvania, and they've done deer tagging on it and color data and stuff in the past and everything, and they had shot a doe on there in rifle season. And I was there visiting, and I saw it, and it had the tag on it, and it was 14 years old. Was you
Wow.
know from and that doe she was looking pretty rough at that point, but it's just cool to see, like, some of those older deer and how they're growing up their whole lives thinking about, like, you know how much our society has changed in that amount of time, everything, and they're just doing deer things.
Yep. Yeah. It's just like I said. It's just a cool. I mean, I just maybe because I grew up with it, I'll never get it. But I just don't know how you can't be into deer one way or another because they're really just cool animals. And
Yeah.
I still to this day, people I think they think I'm kidding them, but when I'm giving a talk to a group or something, and then we get into this issue, number one, they're surprised at my level of passion for deer and hunting, having been involved with it for so long. But also, two, I tell them that I still to this day, I don't pass by a deer driving down the road without stopping to look at it. And they fascinate me to that level, and I hope that I never lose that.
Yeah, no, I can definitely relate to you there. And the same thing, the trail cameras, everything. Like, I just love learning about deer. I've become fascinated with using trail cameras on video mode and just watching their mannerisms. And, like, there was a buck that I was
Hmm.
hunting last year that he ended up getting killed in rifle season, but he had been hurt for the past 2 years, and he just had this limp. And then I noticed it on the trail camera videos, and then I'd see it. I could tell where his track was because he, like, dragged his foot, and I knew it was that deer based off of watching that footage and being able to understand it. So it's fun getting to watch deer and learn about them and how they're just amazing animals. That's for sure.
Yep, no question.
Yeah. Well, hopefully next time that I get to have you on here, Nick, we can just, instead of me just grilling you on questions about, NDA and conservation and all this stuff, we could talk about some deer hunting stories too. But I think it was really important to kind of go through this, and I hope that people check out, the deer report, check out the website, all those different resources for that. And I do have, quite a few of, like, newer hunters that listen to the podcast. And I think that there's a lot of importance to being able to have a website and a resource, an organization, like NDA is, to be able to go through and understand, the whole background on it, from the deer conservation side, and then also just looking at the numbers. There's so much good stuff that you can learn from those numbers. And even if you're planning, that deer report is something that I use as far as, like, even planning hunts, out of state, and I want to go somewhere different. You can kind of understand things by looking at, all right, this is where, most of the harvests are taken with a bow or crossbow versus rifle versus, muzzleloader, and, like, all those different things can play into it and be a really cool resource. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about that.
No, absolutely. It's my pleasure and anytime. And I'll tell people that we've been doing this deer report since 2009. And from our website, you can download all of those. And so this is free to anybody. You just go to our website, download it, and you can have it right at your fingertips. So I'd encourage people to do that.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience here, or and Deer Association? Is it .com or .org? I should know that.
Deerassociation.com,
.com.
or you
Okay.
can just Google it if you don't use URLs anymore. I'm lazy. I don't use them typically. But
Yeah, true.
yeah, deer, and we have some cool social media sites too. You can easily find. Just search them and check it out and give us a look. And no, other than that, just I appreciate what you do, Bo, and your hunting is part of it. I enjoy watching that and following you. And if I was a little younger, I might try to follow in your footsteps a little bit more, covering the ground and the hills that you cover. And so I appreciate that. And yeah, you do a good thing bringing this stuff to light. So thank you for the opportunity.
No, thank you so much for coming on, Nick. I really enjoyed it, and definitely everyone go check out both of the podcasts that NDA has there too, and check those out and listen. So there's some good. Yeah, you and Mike are good on the deer, or the coffee and deer podcast there, and looking forward to checking out Grossman's podcast there as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you for coming on, Nick, and we will talk to you soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.